Okay. So, and for everyone, if you feel comfortable to keep your camera on, just we have a sense of community, but if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine too. Welcome everyone to AI-Skeptics, which is a public talk online series offering a space for critical reflection about the implication of AI on research, work, and society. I'm Anne Fired, ERA Chair Professor in Social Innovation at Nova School of Business and Economics. And we decided to start this series with three of our colleagues at Nova SBE, Bianca Crivelli-Egger, Sam Ortiz-Casillas, who will join us a little bit later, and Sai Calvapal, who is currently in Boston. The four of us, we noticed that there was a general trend of positive, over-optimist narratives around AI with very few spaces for asking questions and challenging assumptions. And very often when asking questions, in conversation, we realized that we were very often frowned upon or, considered as kind of a Luddite, reactionary people. And so as if, we were just refusing change that was kind of equal to progress. And so I guess we all share more constructive views on technology. By that, I mean, we don't think technology is inevitable nor neutral, but that it is constructed and produced by some, interpreted by users. And we believe that we, individuals, organizations, and society at large have or should have agency in choosing what to use, how, and when. And so we realized that we were not the only ones asking these questions, but that we were missing a space to do so. And we thought of creating this public online series. And so we are particularly thrilled to launch this series with Sarah Fatala, who, I was just telling her she was one of the sources of inspiration for AI-Skeptics as we had a conversation, Sam and I, when Sarah was visiting us in June for a research visit at Nova. So Sarah Fatala is a community organizer and a critical AI researcher focusing on the carceral impacts of technology. They are currently pursuing an MS in AI ethics and society at the Leverhulme Centre for Future of Intelligence, University of Cambridge, where they research how artificial intelligence supports the surveillant, experimental, and necropolitical logics of carceral geographies, especially along racialized lines. Today, Sarah will talk about border AI violence and the limits of regulatory oversight with a focus on the case of the increased adoption of AI for border control by the European Union. So the format for today is Sarah is going to share their work for about 20 minutes. You can put questions, comments in the chat, but it'd be nice if during the last part of the talk, you can also just speak up. We will have time for question and discussion at the end because the idea is really to have a conversation. So without further ado, Sarah, the floor is yours, and thanks a lot for waking up early and joining us.
No, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here, and I very much align with your description. Not a Luddite, but a skeptic. And I'm hoping that this conversation or this presentation also comes across as such. I'm not going to repeat what Anne-Laure already said, and I'm just going to go and dive in. So just to give a little bit of context, in recent years, the European Union has been really escalating in its interest in the adoption of AI systems for border control. And just to shorten it, I'll just call it border AI instead of saying AI systems of border control. Mostly prioritizing functions such as algorithmic surveillance and forecasting of future mobility. So broadly speaking, migrants are tracked through an extensive apparatus of smart cameras, drones, satellites, biometric systems, as well as digital surveillance through their mobile phones and other electronic monitoring tools. And by mining and tracing these data traces, including their movements, geolocation, social media use, and financial transactions, the EU and their partners attempt to predict their migration flow with the stated objective of better planning and allocating resources, but with the effect of proactively halting migration. And in light of the proliferation of AI systems of various domains, not just in border control, the EU adopted the first of its kind Artificial Intelligence Act, in short, AI Act. This was in March 2024, last year. And the act came to be with the goal of regulating the risks of AI systems and to protect fundamental rights. So those are the two goals. So regulating risks and protecting fundamental rights. And we'll come back to that later in the presentation. So I'll first begin by describing the EU's border regime, broadly speaking, and I'll present the Morocco-Spain border as an illustrative case. And then I will discuss the inherent violence of the EU's external borders, and then identify how AI exacerbates that violence. And lastly, I will analyze the EU's regulatory approach to governing border AI through the AI Act before I conclude. All right. For those of you who are not familiar with the term border externalization, a core imperative of EU border politics is this idea of outsourcing border control to non-EU countries. So what we call third countries become responsible for executing practices that are directed at, where the migrant is at. And those practices mean surveillance, patrolling, deportation, and detention. So in short, and I'm oversimplifying, non-EU countries of origin or transit are entrusted to track and contain migrants before they even reach EU borders. And the EU benefits from this because it allows it to obscure and thereby evade responsibility for fundamental right violations that can be linked to externalizing its borders. Blaming third countries when cases of death or maltreatment capture mainstream attention. And this is important because the interception and pushback of people who are applying or were seeking to apply for international protection and asylum go against the principle of non-refoulement under international human rights law. So to bypass this requirement, the EU privileges stopping migrants before they arrive at its borders and tasks third countries with doing so. And in exchange for carrying out these functions, the EU provides third countries with donated equipment, training for their border agents, financing of their operations. A key mechanism of border externalization is the use of development aid funds and budget lines to finance border control projects in third countries. So even though EU development funding on paper, technically, is meant to have as its primary objective the reduction and in the long term, the eradication of poverty, budget lines are continuously diverted to border control. So to make this a little bit more concrete, I'm going to use Morocco as an example of a border externalization partner of the EU. So in case you're not familiar with the geography, that's Spain, that's Morocco right below it. This border comprises maritime routes, basically through the Strait of Gibraltar. So going from Morocco north through the Mediterranean Sea towards the Iberian Peninsula, as well as from the Atlantic Ocean shores to the Canary Islands further down in the map. So the Canary Islands are still Spanish. I don't know why I said still. I don't think they're ever giving them up, but they're Spanish territory. And obviously Morocco and Spain are on two separate continents. But in addition, the Morocco-Spain border also contains the only land connections between the EU and Africa, and that's through the Spanish enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla, who are also sort of vestiges of Spanish control in North Africa. And those are really tiny, if you can see. It was barely like a few kilometers wide. But basically, after Spain joined what later became the EU in 1986, the control of its southern borders with Morocco became a political priority. As early as 1992, if I'm not mistaken, both countries ratified what they call a readmission agreement, meaning Morocco is required to take back migrants who, if they're suspected to have entered Spain illegally. Morocco also became one of the first countries where the model of allotting aid funds for border control was trialed. It's conservatively estimated that Morocco has received hundreds of millions of euros from various EU budget lines over the years, and about 20% of those funds are dedicated to programs related to protection and rights, with the remaining 80% for financing border control projects. So already this funding allocation reflects a deliberate focus on protecting the impermeability of EU borders rather than safeguarding or protecting the rights of migrants. The exact usage of those funding is not always made transparent, but some publicly available information shows that funds received by Morocco covered the purchase of surveillance and border control equipment, amongst them spyware for extracting data from mobile phones for the official purposes of combating irregular migration and human trafficking, as well as the training of local authorities on electronic surveillance and data interception and scraping. News outlets have also reported that the EU provided Morocco with software that's capable of unlocking smartphones and getting past lock screens and retrieve geopositioning data, call messaging records, et cetera, et cetera. Similarly, civil society organizations revealed that Frontex, which is the border control agency of the European Union, has delivered AI-driven systems to Morocco, among them a fleet of autonomous drones that collects data on the trajectories of sea vessels that are carrying migrants in order to predict the future crossings of maritime vessels. And then on land, there's sort of similar drones that are intended to automatically detect and identify targets of interest and their positioning, as well as optimally generate trajectories for inspection planning. So this is the official language. But in other words, border control authorities determine the identity of specific migrants that they determine are their targets, and they subsequently predict their movement to allocate inspection resources along their routes. So these surveillance and forecasting tools can collect crucial information to target migrants and meet the EU's objectives of thwarting their movement at points of origin or of transit before they reach their destination. So why is this important? Violence, contemporary and historical, is foundational to EU borders. It's really difficult to know for certain how many migrants have fallen victim to EU border violence because of a lack or incompleteness of data and the disappearance of migrants en route. But one study by the Global Migration Data Analysis Center estimated that 1 for every 13 at-risk persons died crossing the central Mediterranean towards Europe. The data obtained through the algorithmic surveillance of migrants allows Morocco to enact a wide range of migration curtailment practices. And those include maritime interception and diversion, police raids on makeshift migrant settlements on land, indiscriminate arrests without charge, arbitrary containment in detention centers, and summary expulsions from Morocco, including migrants being put on buses and taken to the border with Algeria and left in the middle of the desert. So because of this, intercepted or expelled migrants disappear and die on water and land. Migrants are abused and even flogged during police raids. A 2012 survey by Médecins Sans Frontières found that 63% of migrants and refugees in Morocco have experienced severe beatings, sexual violence, and other forms of brutalization at the hands of authorities, including anti-riot material, tear gas, and rubber bullets frequently being used on migrants. Wounded migrants are denied medical assistance, with a reporter saying, with Moroccan authorities using the emergency services to first remove the dead rather than attend to the injured. And beyond these physical injuries, obviously, migrants suffer psychological trauma from their experiences and from being ripped away from their families, especially children. So the violence is enabled by border AI systems that track migrants and predict their movements, providing Moroccan authorities with the information necessary to target and block them. So this led me to ask the question, in what ways do border AI systems facilitate or exacerbate border violence? And in addressing this question, 3 features come to mind. First, the massive data collection apparatus that migrants are subjected to, as is the case in the Morocco-Spain border, is necessary to render them legible to authorities, right? They're dispossessed of large quantities of data on exploitative terms because they can't opt out, they can't seek appeal, or seeking appeal is nearly impossible. And this continuous sort of project of legibility expands as surveillance techniques become more sophisticated, bordering sites become more geographically diffused, and with more data captured touch points, more migrants become known to border control authorities, allowing for their targeting. Second, the algorithmic processing of large amounts of data is used to anticipate and speculate on future behavior activities, as seen in border AI systems that aim to predict migration flows and forecast mobility. This logic of preemption broadens the territoriality of border violence because it allows for the interception of migrants further upstream in their migration journey from their origin and throughout their routes. And then third, the rapid research and development cycles of AI technologies require constant experimentation, testing, and iteration. Activists have warned that the Morocco-Spain border, along with other border scapes around the world, are being turned into a laboratory for AI systems at the expense of migrant and refugee communities that are on the receiving end of these experimental and high-risk technologies in a manner that would not otherwise be allowed in other spaces or tested out on citizens. And new border AI projects are implemented by authorities only to discover that the systems do not perform as expected when the harms to migrants are virtually irreversible. So these are three ways in which AI makes it such that border violence becomes more precisely targeted, more preemptive, and then more conducive to experimental harm. So with that, how does the EU tackle regulating or overseeing border AI through the EU AI Act? To give a little bit of background, the AI Act establishes a set of risk-based rules to support the safe development of AI and protect fundamental rights. So they take different AI systems and they assess their risks. And according to those risks, system developers and deployers are required to abide by certain obligations. So as I previously discussed, I think that border AI endangers migrants in three fundamental ways. So I want to see how the AI accounts for them. When it comes to dispossessing migrants for their data, the AI regulates AI use in publicly accessible spaces so as to limit surveillance and data collection from civilians. Yet, the Act explicitly states that publicly accessible spaces do not include border zones, which permits the unregulated use of AI to capture data from migrants. So for example, AI systems that identify individuals from a distance using their biometrics, for example, their facial features, their voice, or their gait, which is the way that they walk, they can capture and store the data of migrants without evidence, suspicion, or legal justification. When it comes to how border AI facilitates the preemptive pushback of migrants, the AI entirely de-risks predictive analytics systems that are used for border control purposes. And those are the systems that are used to predict, interdict, and curtail migration. And when it comes to the experimental nature of border AI, the Act regulates the real-world testing of systems by requiring that the providers or prospective providers of those systems adhere to several conditions to ensure that that testing does not have negative effects on individuals involved in those tests. Again, border control systems are not subject to those requirements. When it comes to how the AI Act classifies the risks of specific AI systems based on their functions, even those classifications are troubling. So the list of AI systems that are classified as high risk does not include, for example, tools that are used for mobile data extraction, as well as tools used for dialect and language recognition. These are all features that are used for the electronic surveillance of migrants. So not considered high risk. But even when border AI systems are considered high risk and thus should be subject to more stringent requirements, as is the case for remote biometric identification systems, migration authorities are exempted from completing transparency and oversight requirements. So, for example, they are allowed to register their systems in a non-public section of the EU database, unlike other authorities, and they're not required to submit training data. They're not required to submit summaries of their fundamental rights impact assessments. So these exemptions obstruct public scrutiny and they limit access to crucial information that migrant advocates can use to protect the rights of migrants and potentially pursue redress. And lastly, even when border AI systems are entirely prohibited by the AI Act, such as mass biometric surveillance or profiling systems, migration authorities are exempt from complying with their ban altogether. So if they're not misqualified at lower risk levels, border AI systems that are banned or deemed as high risk come with exemptions for border control actors. So taken all together, a tapestry of exceptions, risk minimizations, and emissions was woven into the AI Act in a way that codifies impunity, opaqueness, and a differentiated oversight approach towards migrants. It's evident that the AI Act fails to sufficiently regulate border AI systems and fails to safeguard migrants from their harms. And these are, again, the two purported goals of the AI Act. This approach could be interpreted as a regulatory failure. However, what is codified in a piece of legislation is not just a set of legal provisions, but it's also a system of values that signals what is permissible and what isn't. And the value system that is encoded in the AI Act reflects the EU's priorities. And by allowing for the unbridled use of border AI, I argue that the Act is actually successful in sustaining the violence of EU borders. The EU, including through the AI Act, is not just unconcerned with protecting migrants from border violence, but actually requires that violence to punish migrants for daring to approach its land boundaries and territorial waters. Leave it at that with a quote from Aisha Siddiqui that I often find really insightful, which is that every border implies the violence of its maintenance. I'll stop sharing to allow for questions.
Thank you so much. I'm opening the floor for questions. Okay, Mary, do you want to share with us?
You mean me, Anna?
Yeah.
Nah, I just Sarah, just wanted to say thank you just because I'm in the world of systems design thinking, design research, and it's so important right now to like be hearing these sort of case studies around AI's impact around these social issues. It's blowing my mind actually in a lot of ways. It's like I knew but I didn't know, and so to tell this story um is something I'm just processing right now. So I don't really have a question at the moment, but I just wanted to share my impression. So thank you for this talk. It's really important.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for sharing your impressions. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. Any questions or votes? Or everybody's just like trying to digest the facts.
Talk about being a skeptic, huh?
Well, I guess I can sort of share in the, I don't know what the negative version of awe is, just to sort of kind of process why there's so little oversight and why these kinds of trespassing on justice is being afforded. And I'm just curious to learn, Sarah, like, are there conversations in more legal spaces that are, trying to push some regulations forward or trying to amend existing regulations to, prevent this kind of abuse for lack of scrutiny, for want of a better word?
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely legal scholars that are working to push back against, I don't even want to call them oversight because at this point it feels intentional, but sort of the lacking legal and regulatory systems that are in place. In Europe, in particular, in the EU, there's a coalition called the Protect Not Surveil Coalition that has been really vocal and really instrumental in speaking up for the rights of migrants throughout the development of the AI Act. This was a piece of legislation that took years of back and forth and negotiation with civil society. And obviously, they're still disappointed that the AI Act is not as strong as it should have been or as they were advocating for it, but that's the kind of work that they're continuing to do, including through like direct service to migrants who are being impacted by these technologies, but also sort of like broader advocacy. So it's there. I don't know how much of it feels like it's keeping up with the just like the powers of the border industrial complex, not just in the EU, but globally. But yeah.
What does that direct service look like? Just to kind of empower migrants in certain ways, because in you know, if you think about it, it seems almost like close to impossible to protect yourself from some of these ever-present technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be mostly things like migrants who may have had their asylum applications denied or that have been refilled, and they believe that their case does not or like merits further scrutiny because maybe these AI systems have been discriminatory in some way or they've made a mistake. So it's not sort of pushing back on a systemic level as to like, do these border AI systems, should they even exist? Should they even be in place? But it's sort of more so on a specific, like legal case by case basis.
Makes sense. Thank you.
So I have a...
Oh, sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
Bianca, go.
Sorry, I didn't know how to raise my hand. So Sarah, thank you for this. Honestly, as a trained lawyer and former practicing lawyer, this gave me goosebumps. And especially one thing, like honestly, I mean, everything predictive to me is scary per se, but when it comes to predicting migration routes in order to then take action against these people who haven't yet done anything is just the opposite of a golden principle of criminal law, which is innocent until proven guilty, which is a direct descendant of a fundamental right, which is the right to defense. And just knowing that this is even out there is really scary, and in a legislation that is the first of its kind from a union of countries that is supposedly at the forefront of freaking democracy and human rights. It's just, yeah, scary. There was this Steven Spielberg film now maybe 20 years ago, which pictured the dystopia of a world like this. It was called Minority Report. I don't know if you've seen it, but this is worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if there's a question in there.
Like,
it's just yeah.
Melchior?
Yeah, again, I'm not sure if it's necessarily going to be phrased as a question, and maybe more so as like a future or something else to consider as well. But what I think is also very, very scary with these kinds of with this accumulation of data on people is then what is the lasting impact after, after, like, let's say someone does, through this migratory path, does actually manage to arrive in a country and does, become, migrate successfully per se. That information is still there. Those countries still have all that information. And so I don't know if that's something that's emerged at all, is like the impact on people that have also already gone through the process of migration, and then what that kind of looks like for them, still having that data in the hands of people who can then, for example, right now where I'm in Paris, right? Let's say if we get an overturn from the more nationalist movement, what then that means for people who now have their data in the hands of in the hands of these kind of these people making these decisions and having that kind of that power over people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's interesting that you say that. I watched a video like last night as I was preparing for this talk, about a migrant that had successfully like made its way to Paris of all places, and had been stopped at a just like I don't know, a random maybe traffic control. I don't recall exactly the situation, but like the person who had intercepted them like used like a phone app of some kind to like fingerprint them and immediately like had their identity and sort of like their migration pattern and history, which is like a really scary thing to think about, that like just a regular like law enforcement agent like just like roaming around can have access to such I don't know, like an invasive like like well of data about an individual. And yeah, obviously a lot of it is racialized, like people who are being intercepted, like look a certain way and are perceived to be a certain way. And yeah, depending on the political leanings of the different governments in the EU, which it's not looking great where the trajectory is headed, it's likely going to get worse, unfortunately.
So,
And actually, oh, sorry, can
no,
I add
no,
one?
go. Yeah, of course.
The thing that I don't know how to articulate, and I feel like that's maybe a research project in and of itself, is that like we all are complicit, and not necessarily in the ways in which we, we're not in the ways in which we think about, which is that a lot of these technologies are built on systems that also use our data to improve, like our faces when we're using whatever, like face unlocking our phones, and when we use fingerprinting and all of these like commercial systems that the more data they have, the more they become precise and efficient. Like they're like these systems are not just using the migrants of data to recognize them, they're also using everybody else's data to be even more efficient. And that part I don't really know how to reconcile with.
Sarah, when you say being complicit, what do you think we can do as individuals?
I don't know that I want you to risk being a Luddite either. I too don't use, I have a very to the extent that it's possible, I try to avoid biometric systems of identification as much as possible. Not that you can evade them entirely. Today, like facial recognition systems are just like so incredibly potent. Like even if you're wearing masks or if you're hiding half of your face, like you still run the risk of being recognized anyway, as we've seen in a lot of cases of like protests here in the US, and I'm sure in other parts of the world. I think, I don't know, I think maybe there's something to I don't know if it's cultural, I don't know if it's like narrative, but there's something about countering, and I know I've gathered that maybe some of this audience has sort of like some design background, or like works in systems design or other design fields. There's something to be said about how we're weighing convenience and sort of like user friendliness in like such high regard compared to like the harms of systems. And so when I think of like, yes, maybe it takes like half a second or like a few seconds less to unlock your phone by using a PIN compared to like, a biometric system, I would think that maybe we can take a little bit more friction in order to not give out like data so willingly, because again, it's not just our individual. Like if it were just mine and I'm like, oh yeah, like it's fine, they can have like my fingerprints on my face, like it's okay. But ultimately, when we understand that they're entangled in these like broader like systems, and it's hard to like draw boundaries around how your data is used, right? I think, for example, I live in the Bay Area in San Francisco. There are all these like Waymo driverless cars that are like essentially surveillance machines on wheels. Like those things have like all the sensors and the cameras in the world. And when you read about people who want to use them, it's things like, well, I don't want to talk to the driver. And I don't know that I don't know that the like convenience of avoiding a conversation that maybe feels uncomfortable outweighs the harm that these vehicles can cause, right? I don't know. So I don't have a particularly like eloquent or fully formed articulation around this, but I think somebody actually wrote an essay called The Tyranny of Convenience. I think there's something about like fighting against the tyranny of convenience. Like I don't know that everything needs to be so convenient and so frictionless when it comes at these kinds of expenses.
I'll let Laura go and then I'll go after.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any questions on that either, other than just, yeah, like I'm kind of, virtually snapping along as well. Just like, this is so helpful and so interesting to hear my background is user research. So yeah, very, very much less an academic background, and coming to this with just a lot of concerns for where the tech world is headed, and the United States in general. Also, I love the tyranny of convenience, because I do think like we're starting to see removing friction, and even in learning, right? Like well, there's these necessary frictions that we need in our lives. We need to be interacting with strangers. We need to be humanizing each other. But I'll try not to rant on that. I do think there's a question in here somewhere, but I will kind of contextualize it maybe in my space that I'm in right now. I live really close to Denver, Colorado in the United States. And right now there is a private company called Flock Safety that is, okay, yeah, I figured you knew of them, Sarah. For folks on the call, they are a private company that owns cameras. So essentially a surveillance company that will allow cities to plug into kind of the predictive algorithms like Palantir provides, and kind of surveil citizens all within the context of making things safer and providing state police and city police with that data. So I think my question is, one, as a person who's loves to research things, but maybe not an academic, I would be curious if you have any recommendations for resources to help kind of form there's already some good discussions happening, but I would like to get more involved. And I think, yeah, providing more evidence and thinking about the narrative would be helpful. So that was my first question. I think there was 2 questions in there. If you know of any sources that I could pull from and start to craft a case, and if you've had or have any suggestions for having these conversations in local communities where it is starting to happen.
Oh, I'm smiling because we're in the middle of fighting a Flock acquisition contract in Oakland right now. Like literally the vote is on Tuesday. So that's actually hugely part of what my community organizing is, to fight against like AI-enabled surveillance in cities. It started with a technology called ShotSpotter, which claims to recognize like gunshots through their acoustic signatures, and it's as faulty and as dubious as you can imagine it is, and has led to all kinds of really tragic outcomes. And Flock is that like overcharged by 100, because the front is that they have these like license plate readers, which you might think of as pretty innocuous. You're reading like the license plates of vehicles, but they're actually just like filming things 24/7, and they're able to collect way more data than just license plates around cars. And they've been used to track people who have sought abortions across state lines. They've been used to track trans folks, or people who are seeking trans-affirming care. They've been used to track immigrants. There have been a lot of reporting around Flock data being accessed by ICE, despite a lot of legal limitations around that. Like California is not supposed to provide data to federal law enforcement, and it still does. And who else? And protesters have also been identified through Flock systems. We can take this one-on-one if you'd like. There's plenty of resources, and I'm happy to plug you into like a national block Flock space. I don't know folks in Denver specifically, but there are plenty of resources around that. I actually think that designers have a big role to play in this conversation. I've been like designing a shit ton of materials. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't swear. I'm being filmed. To like pass around like community neighbors, and like sort of disseminate like talking points, and also like kind of like fight against this narrative of like public safety, and that public safety it requires surveillance, or requires like mass surveillance in this capacity. Yeah, I'd be happy to share those if we want to I feel like I could speak about this for a while just because it's so salient right now. But yeah,
Yeah.
if you're interested about, I don't know if your question was about border. I like had a slide, I think, with just like, oh, never mind. Oh yes, this one. If you're interested about border systems in particular, I think these 3 books are particularly interesting. They have a more global view, and I think the benefit of them has been to see how much this is a border industrial complex, and like a lot of the same actors in the EU are in the, you know, the US-Mexico border, are in Palestine. And so having sort of a broader understanding of the vendors, like the political economy of these systems, this can help. But it won't necessarily give you like the specifics in like your geography and how you can plug in. Stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I would love to connect one-on-one. I feel like, yeah, you have a lot to share that could be really helpful. So yeah, I'll reach out to you via LinkedIn, but thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I'm glad you're, plugging in to inform the community about kind of, I think there's a guise of kind of going back to kind of what someone else was saying, like a guise of the more data we collect, the safer we're all going to be, right? Which is just false.
I think maybe just touching on that a little bit. I don't want to derail this discussion because it was so interesting. But there is also, you know, with the Waymo example, there is this, I mean, also a benefit to, you know, people who need more accessibility accommodations, right? So that's one of the kind of arguments perpetuated for not just maybe convenience, like not, I don't, you know, want to talk to the driver, but also I don't have access to other means of transportation, and driverless cars make my life, you know, easier this way. So a lot of innovation has, you know, historically been either there's a narrative that commercializes it by means of we can actually help democratize, you know, certain accesses. Maybe that's a guise, maybe that's true, maybe that's where the innovation comes from. But I guess like just maybe zooming out, the bigger question might be how do we reconcile these very distinct direct harms while holding space for kind of, you know, acknowledging that there are some distinct benefits in leveling the playing field for other populations. Like it feels like a wicked problem, right?
Yeah, I thank you so much for bringing that point, because I agree. I think there's like these narratives of like convenience, like safety, and also accessibility is something that is invoked to justify or like rationalize the existence of these systems. I want to give an example maybe in case that helps. It will help me answer. So my partner is a professor at a public university here in California, and is a professor of like feminist studies and critical race studies, which, if you understand a little bit about the political situation in the US, has been, you know, under attack. And she's been telling me how much she fears like the accessibility tools that she's required to use in the classroom, including things like live captioning of lectures, right? And she acknowledges like these are important. Some like folks do need to have those tools in order to find the lectures accessible and be able to learn. But the problem is like every single thing is recorded, and every single thing is like out there somewhere that at some point could potentially be subpoenaed by like the federal government and have access to those records, like what kinds of things are being, like she literally teaches Marxism classes. Like it's like not like a sort of a an abstract kind of harm. But then I always ask, like, why is that data recorded? Like, why is it kept? Like, I think this idea of needing, like, similarly with Waymo, like, could there be a driverless vehicle that doesn't require this sort of like massive collection and capture, and then like the never deletion of this data that ultimately does enable like surveillance, including algorithmic surveillance? I don't know if the answer is as simple as that. And I think a lot of the vendors of these technologies will argue that they have to retain data for whatever, compliance reasons, or they have to retain this data because that's how they improve their systems.
Yeah, model development as always.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's a space to push back on. Like when we're fighting against Flock, for example, here in Oakland, like one of the things that we're asking, obviously it would be ideal if they just remove their cameras, but one of the things that we're asking for is like, why do you keep any of this data? Like unless there's a specific ping for a specific like incident that you were called into investigating and that was justified through constitutional policing means, whether or not you agree with that, why is the rest of it in your databases? Why is it available at all? Yeah, so I wonder, like with the cloud and like all these data, and like why is this data there? Like we don't, why?
Yeah. Also, at some point, we're going to run out of ways to store them, right? So it's also like a bigger, more infrastructural question too. Like why do we need this much data that we can eventually just not even hold on to?
Well, for a moment, they're still building data centers, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and exactly, Mary. I was going to say
Yeah.
environmental issues is like we know that, you know, this is like, so it is like kind of a double wicked problems, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we have like about 5 minutes because then Bianca wants to tell us what's happening in January. But I was wondering, what I also find interesting is, you know, you talk about a very local case like Morocco and Spain, but then you talked about the migrants, and so these migrants are not necessarily Moroccans. There's like a whole I guess root of people. So I'm just curious, like, do you have a sense of like the kind of migrants, like who are these people?
Yeah, I had that in my script and then I cut it out because I wanted to stick to 20 minutes. But yes, Morocco is both an origin country and a transit country for migration. So it's both Moroccan people who are Moroccan citizens who are migrating towards the EU, but increasingly it is sub-Saharan African migrants, mostly from West and Central Africa, sort of going through Morocco, and increasingly also people from the Middle East, so from Yemen. I think in recent years and earlier, I think mostly around the Syrian refugee crisis, there were also folks who were coming in from Syria. So yeah, it's the vast majority. I don't think there are official numbers, but the vast majority of migrants, I would say, are not Moroccan. And the racialized dynamics that I talked about are very much also applicable in Morocco. Like there's a lot of different ways in which Moroccan authorities will treat Black migrants in significantly worse ways than in, like, say, their Swana counterparts or like people from the Middle East or Moroccans. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, yes. And so then what happens to these, I'm sorry, I'm the, you know, annoying person who's trying to like get the story, you know, it's like when I go to a castle, I'm imagining how the people were looking like, you know, like 200 or 300 years ago. So I'm just curious, like, so let's say they use this system and then they're being hold in place by, because there are like stories of countries like these third countries who are now like, you know, having camps or whatever carceral systems, or do they just push them back, or like is there a middle, you know, or maybe it's a combination of both, and then the money that is given to them, is it part of this, like, you know, these new things of like paying countries to just, you know, take care of your migrants?
Yeah, both and more. They're definitely being contained in detention centers that are funded by the EU. The official name is not detention center. What is it called? Some euphemistic thing like welcome center or like distribution center, whatever those, you know, those ways in which you can describe things, but they are essentially detention centers. So that's one way that they're dealt with, I guess. And the idea is that they're there and then they're sort of investigated. Their cases are investigated further until they figure out whether they should actually allow them to go through like a asylum application or other like formal migration pathways, versus if they're being refooled. They can just be intercepted and like shipped out. I'm not joking when I say that they literally put people on buses and drive them across the border to Algeria and then just like drop them off in the middle of the desert. That's one of the ways in which migrants experience deaths in this particular like bordering region. What are other ways that they're done? Yeah, and then like migrants do form like their own sort of like makeshift settlements, right? In a place like Morocco, you have a lot of areas that flat out refuse to rent out like housing to migrants, and so they're forced into sort of these more informal ways of housing, and so that also creates like a very easily targetable like geography for the authorities to come in and brutalize on a regular basis. Again, you know, in the same way that like here in the United States, it's like when the police goes after like houseless encampments, it's always, you know, for like public safety and like whatever, all of these reasons. So it's sort of like a similar kind of logic there.
I just have one last question is like, you know, in your paper on Israel use of AI against Palestinian, there's also kind of an improvement of the system by using the data. And I guess it's the same thing here, is that by using the systems, the companies who are, you know, providing the technology to the EU are also improving their systems, or not necessarily?
I suspect that's the case, but there isn't as much, I haven't found as much evidence.
Okay.
And I can tell you why, which is that Israeli companies rely on exporting their technologies, and so they're a little bit more invested about talking about how their technologies work well and how they're being improved. I don't know that that's necessarily the case of European companies like the Thales and Airbus and all of that of the world. So I haven't found like specific examples of them saying that, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we have like just a couple of minutes before ending, and we want to make sure that, you know, we're kind of careful of the time of everybody. So Bianca, if you want to close and tell us what's going to happen in January.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, Sarah, thank you so much. I think it was really a privilege to have you here and, you know, kicking off this new series with such an important topic. I mean, you're talking about human lives and, you know, how AI can impact them negatively, and it's just, and the most vulnerable of human lives. So I think that I can't think of any better way to start this. So thank you for that. We could go on talking for hours. I think there's a lot we haven't touched upon, but I'm glad you're out there doing this work. Thank you also everyone for joining this first session. I hope we'll see you again at the other ones. And yeah, so January 20th will be our next, the second AI-Skeptics meeting. We'll have Alex Hanna. She's a sociologist and she's the director of research at the DARI, Distributed AI Research Institute. And she's going to talk a bit about the impact of AI on exacerbating inequality when it comes to race, gender, and class, and how AI is used to suppress social movements, basically. So that's going to be a good one too. Yeah, and I hope to see you all. We don't have a third one lined up yet, but we have some ideas in mind. And
yes,
yeah,
and so we'll no,
I
I think we're going to put the, you know, if you want to go back, because I think there was so much to digest that, you know, we will post the video on our YouTube channel and we will send it through Eventbrite, and we're going to post the you know, the next talk on Eventbrite probably sometime in December, but I might use the email list so that, you know, you have the information, and we'll try to keep this on. But thank you so much, Sarah, for, you know, being there early morning with us and sharing this super important research, you know, where awareness, you know, is the first, I think, the beginning of making changes. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate you, and I
you,
appreciate the
Sarah.
questions and thoughts very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank